Good morning, students. Today we are going to continue the digestive system. So, yesterday we have gone through the different parts of the digestive system. They are the buccal cavity, pharynx, esophagus, stomach, intestine, then rectum, and the anus. So, yesterday we have completed the buccal cavity, the first organ, the first portion, the anterior opening of the alimentary canal, that is the gastrointestinal canal. So that is the first one, that is the buccal cavity, which is nothing but the buccal cavity, and that buccal cavity contains three different parts: the tongue, teeth, and the salivary glands. We have already studied about all these three parts. Teeth, 32 teeth, permanent teeth, and 20 teeth, the temporary teeth. There are two types of teeth. So we have learnt about the teeth, the structure of the teeth, the different parts of the teeth also. Now coming to the pharynx, the second one is the pharynx. The first is the buccal cavity, second one is the pharynx. Pharynx lies between the mouth and esophagus. It consists of three parts: nasopharynx, oropharynx, and laryngopharynx. The pharynx is about 13 centimeter long tube. It is a 13 centimeter long tube having three parts: nasopharynx, oropharynx, and laryngopharynx. There are three types. So while dealing with the respiratory system, I have explained about the pharynx, then larynx. So all the parts I have explained in the respiratory system. So while explaining the respiratory system, I have explained the pharynx. So the pharynx is 13 centimeter long tube which consists of three parts, that is nasopharynx, oropharynx, and laryngopharynx. Pharynx is a wide muscular tube situated behind the nose, mouth, and larynx. It is situated behind the nose, mouth, and larynx. It is 13 centimeter long, and upper part is wider than the lower part of the gastrointestinal tract, that is the alimentary canal. It is divided into three parts, that is the nasopharynx, nasal part; oropharynx, the oral part; the laryngopharynx, which is nothing but the laryngeal part. Coming to the first one, nasal pharynx, nasopharynx. This part is situated behind the nasal cavity. It resembles the nasal cavity in structure and function. In structure and function, it resembles the nasal cavity, and this is behind the nasal cavity. It is respiratory in function and lined by ciliated columnar epithelial cells. The ciliated columnar epithelial cells are present in this portion, nasopharynx, which portion is respiratory in function. The lateral wall of nasopharynx contain opening for auditory tube or eustachian tube which connects to middle ear cavity. The eustachian tube of the middle ear opens in the nasopharynx. It moves towards the nasopharynx, and in the nasopharynx, these eustachian canal which connects the middle ear with the nasopharynx opens here in the nasopharynx. During swallowing the food from buccal cavity, the apex of soft palate moves like a pendulum, swinging upwards to close the nasopharynx and prevents the materials from entering the nasal cavity. So it prevents the food entering inside the nasal cavity. The palate, soft palate, which is present at the posterior portion of the buccal cavity. Coming to the next point, at the superior portion of the nasopharynx, there is nasopharyngeal tonsils, which is a collection of lymphoid tissue. Superior portion of the nasopharynx, there is a nasopharyngeal tonsil, and that is nothing but it is a lymphoid tissue. It is well developed in children and is called adenoid. In the children, it is called adenoid. It contains a rich supply of lymphocytes. It is covered with ciliated epithelium that traps and destroys invading pathogens entering during inhalation of the air. During the inhalation of the air, the pathogens will also enter inside, and this lymphoid ciliated epithelial cells, they trap the pathogens. Another collection of lymphoid tissue is present in the nasal cavity, in the nasopharynx, behind the opening of the eustachian tube, called tubal tonsils. Now coming to the oropharynx, that's the second one. Oropharynx is the middle part of the pharynx and a passage away from both air and food. It is the middle part of the pharynx and a passage away for both air and food. It is situated behind the oral cavity and communicated by isthmus or isthmus. The oropharynx contains two sets of tonsils: palatine tonsils located laterally in the wall of oropharynx and lingual tonsils located at the base of the tongue. The tonsils are composed of lymphoid tissues and trap and destroy pathogens entering the body through oral or nasal cavities. The wall of the oropharynx is lined by stratified squamous epithelial cells. The third portion of the pharynx, that is the laryngopharynx. It is inferior to oropharynx and posterior to laropharynx. It continues as a common route for air and food, and at inferior end of it gives the separate way for digestive and respiratory systems. It is lined by stratified squamous epithelial cells as like in oropharynx. So this is about the pharynx. The pharynx is about 13 centimeter long and divided into three parts: nasopharynx, oropharynx and laryngopharynx. Laryngopharynx is lowest part and it lies behind the larynx. Coming to the esophagus, OESOPHAGUS, esophagus. It is the third organ of digestion: buccal cavity, pharynx and esophagus. Esophagus is a muscular tube which extends between pharynx above and cardiac orifice of stomach below. It extends up to the cardiac orifice of the stomach and cardiac opening of the stomach, and at the anteriorly it starts from the posterior portion of the larynx. It is muscular tube. It is also called as the food pipe, and it lies between trachea in front and vertebral column at the back from the thorax. It enters the abdomen through the esophageal opening of the diaphragm. It is about 25 centimeters long food pipe It is 25 centimeters long food pipe. Now, the esophagus contains sphincters at its upper and lower ends. These sphincters relax during swallowing. The sphincters are present at the posterior and the anterior part of the esophagus. Then, the process of swallowing: in the mouth, food is masticated and mixed with the saliva. The action of tongue and the cheek convert food into a round mass called bowl. B-O-L-U-S, bowls. This bowls is swallowed. It is swallowed inside. Swallowing occurs in the following 3 steps. There are 3 steps by which the food is swallowed inside the esophagus. It moves from the pharynx and it moves in the esophagus, the food pipe, and this is called as swallowing. The food from the buccal cavity is pushed into the esophagus. There are 3 steps in this swallowing method. The first step, closing of the lips and rising of the tongue against the palate, forces the bowels into oropharynx. Now, the nasopharynx is closed by soft palate and larynx is closed by epiglottis. This prevents the entry of food into the respiratory passage. So this is the first step, wherein the epiglottis is the covering of the windpipe, that is the trachea, and trachea is closed by the epiglottis. The food enters the laropharynx. Larynx, soft palate and larynx is closed by epiglottis. This prevents the entry of food into the respiratory passage. This prevents the entry of the food to the respiratory passage. Now coming to the second stage, by the contraction of the muscles of pharynx, the bowels is forced into the esophagus. By the contraction of the muscles of the pharynx, the food is forced, the bowels of the food is forced into the esophagus. Coming to the third stage, in the esophagus, contraction of its muscular walls carries the food down to the stomach. The muscular wall contraction of the esophagus carries the bowl or the food downwards towards the stomach. This is the third one. It must be noted that the first stage is a voluntary act. The first stage is the voluntary act, but the second stage and the third stage are involuntary. They are involuntary. They are not under our control. The second stage and the third stage. The first stage can be controlled by the will of power of the man. That is a voluntary process. Coming to the stomach and its digestion. Next one is the stomach. First one is the buccal cavity. Second is the pharynx. Third is the esophagus. And the fourth one is the stomach. Stomach and the food digestion in the stomach we have to learn. So, stomach is the dilated portion of alimentary canal. It is a dilated portion of the alimentary canal. I will show you the figure, and this figure is very clear in the notes which I have given already. This is the stomach and this is the complete digestive system. You can see here the salivary glands, buccal cavity, esophagus, stomach, liver, pancreas, the duodenum, the small intestine and the big intestine, rectum and anus is the complete tract, gastrointestinal tract. Here the stomach is enlarged. The stomach is here. So today we are going to study about the stomach and the digestion of the food in the stomach. Now coming to the stomach, it is the dilated portion of the alimentary canal and it receives food from esophagus. It receives the food from esophagus and it is a dilated portion of the alimentary canal, gastrointestinal canal. It lies in the upper part of the abdominal cavity below the left half of the diaphragm. So it lies in the upper part of the abdominal cavity. Coming to the parts of the stomach, stomach has two surfaces, an anterior and the posterior surface. There are two surfaces, anterior surface and the posterior surface. Second one, two borders. The upper border called lesser curvature and a lower border called greater curvature. Lesser curvature is the upper border and the greater curvature is the lower border. Coming to third part of the stomach, that is the two ends. There are two ends in the stomach. The upper end is called cardiac end, which is guarded by cardiac sphincter. The cardiac end is guarded by the cardiac sphincter muscle. The cardiac sphincter muscles are present and they guard the upper part of the upper end of the stomach, which is called as cardiac end, and the lower end called pyloric end is guarded by pyloric sphincter. The pyloric sphincter muscle is present in the pyloric end, which is the lower end of the stomach. Coming to the next portion, that is the fundus. Fundus, a dome-shaped upper part lying to the left of the cardiac end. There is a dome-shaped part called as the fundus. Next point, body, the main part of the stomach. Body is the main part of the stomach. Fundus, body and pyloric antrum. The pyloric antrum, the lower part. There are three parts, the fundus, which is a dome-shaped upper part, and the body, the main part of the stomach, and the pyloric portion, that is the lower part of the body, lower part of the stomach. So the stomach is having two surfaces, two borders, two ends and three parts, that is the fundus, body and pyloric portion. Coming to the secretions of the stomach, the mucous membrane of the stomach contains, before this we will study about the structure of the stomach. Stomach consists of four layers or the four coats. Four coats, they are, the first one is peritoneal coat made up of serous covering. Peritoneal coat, serous covering. Second one is muscular coat made up of longitudinal, circular and oblique fibers, oblique muscle fibers. Longitudinal, circular and oblique muscle fibers, the second layer, that is a muscular coat. The third layer is submucous coat, which is made up of areolar tissue. Submucosa coat is the third layer, and the fourth one is a mucosa coat made up of mucous membrane. The fourth one is a mucus coat made up of mucous membrane. There are four layers. If you take the section of the stomach, then you can see the four layers clearly. The first layer is the peritoneal layer, which is serous covering, and the second one is the muscular coat made up of longitudinal, circular and oblique muscle fibers. The third one is the submucosa layer made up of areolar tissue. Fourth one is mucus coat made up of mucous membrane. Now coming to the secretions of the stomach. In the stomach, the mucous membrane of the stomach contains glands which secrete gastric juice. The juice or the enzymes secreted by the stomach are called gastric enzymes or gastric juice. Gastric juice, which is nothing but the juice of the stomach, the juice of the enzymes of the liver, the enzymes of the pancreas. All these things they collectively called as the gastric juice. So this gastric juice, secretion of gastric juice occurs due to reflex mechanism through vagus nerves, the reflex mechanism of the vagus nerve. And secondly, gastrin, a hormone secreted by the action of food stuff on gastric mucosa membrane. Then psychological effects produced by taste or smell of the food. Gastric juice contains these are the instigations for the production of the gastric juice. First one is the reflex action of the vagus nerve, then gastrin hormone production, which stimulates the gastric mucous membrane to produce the enzymes. Then the third one is the physiological effects produced by the taste, smell, or of the food. If you taste the food or smell the food, then immediately this instigates or stimulates the stomach cells to produce the enzymes. The enzymes produced by the stomach are gastric juice contains stomach, that is the gastric juice. The gastric juice contains pepsin, renin, hydrochloric acid, and intrinsic factors. Mainly the pepsin enzyme, renin enzyme, hydrochloric acid. Three enzymes, three chemicals are produced by the intestine that makes the gastric juice. Now coming to the pepsin, the first one, the pepsin. It is an enzyme produced by glands present in fundus and body of the stomach. The fundus portion and the body of the stomach having the glands, and they produce this hormone, that is the pepsin. In the presence of hydrochloric acid, this is very important. So the pepsin acts in the presence of hydrochloric acid, hence the hydrochloric acid is also produced by the stomach. It is nothing but acid. We feel that if the acid is produced, then the burning will be there, but it is not like that, because the hydrochloric acid is very much necessary for the action of enzyme pepsin. The pepsin, in the presence of hydrochloric acid, converts protein into peptones. It acts on the proteins of the food. The food contains carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Three main portions are there in our food, and the first one is the carbohydrate, the second is the proteins. So these proteins are broken down by the action of pepsin enzyme in the presence of hydrochloric acid. If there is no hydrochloric acid, the pepsin will not work. So hence the pepsin works only in the presence of hydrochloric acid, and it converts the proteins into peptones. Proteins are broken down into peptones. Then coming to the next one, renin. Renin enzyme. It is the enzyme which curdles milk. It curdles the milk. The milk which is present in the food material, food present in the stomach is curdled. It is curdles. So this enzyme curdles the milk. It involves the conversion of cosinogen, the soluble protein of the milk, into insoluble casein. So the soluble protein of the milk is transferred into insoluble casein by this renin. That means it curdles the milk. Then coming to the hydrochloric acid, it is secreted by parietal cells of the gastric glands. It is secreted by the parietal cells of gastric glands. Its concentration is about 0.4% in gastric juice. 0.4% in the gastric juice. The function of hydrochloric acid is, the first one, it neutralizes the saliva and acidification of the food. It neutralizes the saliva which is present in the food present in the stomach, which is coming from the buccal cavity. The saliva is mixed in the buccal cavity and it is pushed in the stomach. So this food saliva is neutralized by this hydrochloric acid. This is the one function of the hydrochloric acid. Second function is it helps the action of the pepsin. I have already told that pepsin shows its action only in the presence of the hydrochloric acid. So helping the action of pepsin in converting protein into peptones. The third very important action is antiseptic action. It has the antiseptic action by killing the bacteria and the viruses present in the food material. So the food material which is present in the stomach is having, if it's having the microbes or the bacteria, then they are killed by this hydrochloric acid, which acts as a antiseptic solution. Now the next is intrinsic factor. Intrinsic factor is next the function. It is content of gastric juice. Intrinsic factors are the enzymes produced by the gastric juice, and they are, which is necessary for absorption of vitamin B12. The intrinsic factors are very much necessary for absorption of the vitamin B12. This vitamin is necessary for the development of the red blood cells, RBC cells. Development takes place by the help of the vitamin B12. Hence this B12 is very much necessary, and the content of gastric juice, which is necessary for the absorption of B12 vitamin. Now this food is the food present in the stomach is just like curd. It has become the curd like structure. The food becomes a curd like structure, and that structure is called chyme, chyme, chyme. The chyme is the product of the digestive food in the stomach. Chyme is a semi-liquid form, and it is passed on the to the duodenum. It is passed to the duodenum. Now the digestion is over in the stomach, and the food is passed in the intestine. The stomach contains enzymes called pepsin, which converts the proteins into peptone, and the renin, which converts the soluble protein of the milk into insoluble casein, that is, it curdles the milk. Then the hydrochloric acid, which is very much necessary for the action of the pepsin, and it also neutralizes the saliva and acidification of the food. And third one, it is very important, it acts as a antiseptic uh, antiseptic material or the chemical by which kills the bacteria and the viruses present in the food material. So these are the hormones produced, these are the enzymes produced by the stomach. So today we will stop here. Stomach. Tomorrow we will take up the intestine. It is very necessary. It is very important. That is the structure of the intestine, function of the intestine, the digestion, and lastly the absorption, assimilation or absorption. So the intestine is a very important part of the digestive system, which secretes the enzymes for digestion of the food. Further digestion takes place in the intestine. The complete digestion takes place in the intestine. In the intestine, the digestion will be over, and after the digestion, the food material is absorbed or assimilated in the blood. So the food is assimilated or absorbed by the wall of the intestine, and this is the last process, and undigested food is passed back again in the large intestine. So tomorrow we will study about the intestine and the function, digestion and absorption. So thank you very much.